it's, you know, sort of, it just has this really kind of creepy vibe to it and all the rest. And it's one of the, they have this really odd way of sort of, you look at a video and kind of go, I'm not sure if they are actually from the 70s or not, until you actually look further into the band. You go, all right, okay, that's what they're doing. I get what they're at now. That's the vibe they're going for. It's like 70s creepy schlock horror kind of a thing.
Well, that's it, yeah. I think the neck of Meliora was the album that I kind of...
Yeah, you kind of got into
yeah, and that got you into him as well, because I picked it up by mistake because someone had a poster of it in their house and they said, oh, they're a Polish black metal band. And I must check them out. The poster looks kind of cool. And I was like, this isn't fucking black metal. And I was just like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yes.
And
then I picked it up and I was like, yes, I like it.
And I was like, I think Meliora is their definitive album so far anyway in their career. It's an amazing piece of work that's put together. Kind of like going on. It's hard to say, but it sounds a lot like Martin Persner's guitar work throughout. I think for me, anyway. Especially after listening to Magna Carta Cartel, which is a band that he was formed, and there's an awful lot of similarities. But it's the first two albums were kind of rock. This one was. There's so many layers to it. I think it's their defining album.
Absolutely, yeah.
And all the hits are on it as well. With oh god, why can't I fucking think of it? Cerise is their big hit, and that's about his brother.
What? No.
I thought it was Kenny.
I
thought.
What?
Yeah, I thought Cerise was about his brother dying, and he probably is as well. But yeah, from the Pinnacle to the Pit was the first song that I heard actually that really got me into. That I listened to, and I was like, my god, this is really heavy, but there's so much layers and there's organs. It gets more complex.
Lyricism in it as well is fairly complex as well. You know, sort of there's, if you wanted to go kind of off looking up sort of stuff, and you're kind of going, Jesus Christ, there's actually, if you go off reading into sort of, you know, the meaning behind the songs and all the rest, you can take it at face value and you can be like, oh, Satan, or you can go off reading into it and kind of go, Jesus, he's actually fairly well read and a little bit kind of learned about stuff, and you can go off into little alleyways. The
music video for Cerise made me get Ghost, because when I saw that I was like, oh, it's 70s horror movie kind of thing, and like Italian horror movies and so on. I was like, oh fuck, now I kind of get it.
Yes, get exactly what they're going for.
Yeah, and like, so I love Meliora, but it was kind of like that propelled them into kind of like stardom.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
They started doing kind of like, you know, bigger shows with
at that stage. Then they're into Papa 3 as Papa Emeritus 3 at that stage. Yeah,
because we saw them in like a really small kind of students' union hall.
Yeah.
When they were playing in Wales, on the tail of that, they were kind of like just starting to build up.
Yeah, no, it was a tiny audience, it was a tiny venue, and it was still like, I mean,
a lot of people didn't know who they were.
Yeah,
the
only reason like a lot of people were there is like, oh, it was a Friday night, and it was like just Students' Union Bar. Let's go and see who was playing, and it was like half the crowd there didn't have a clue who they were. The other half were like proper Ghost fans. We had travelled, what was it, about 250 miles to see him? Yeah. And
you compare that there is no one in face paint or anything like that, and then we saw him in London.
It was like a year later in the Royal Albert Hall, and it was pandemonium
with people dressed up. And kind of, but in between that, kind of where you think, all right, everything is starting to take off and all that, tragedy hit the band. And this is kind of like where they had their band moment. Yeah. And things started falling apart when it seemed like things were going. So,
that was the trouble. Like, I mean, everything was going so well, as you said. They were just ramping up, as you said, from sort of tiny little tiny gigs around everywhere, playing some backwater in Cardiff, and then all of a sudden they ramped up to playing Royal Albert Hall, which is sort of the jewel in the crown of anywhere. You know, if you're going to play somewhere.
At this time, no one knew anything really about Ghost, other than kind of like what they put out.
That was it. And it was fantastically controlled and well managed. I mean, like, as I said, in today's era of sort of like everything's on the internet and everyone has a social media presence and everyone feels like they have to give themselves and their personality and be always like, hey guys, guess what I'm up to today? I'm posting on Instagram. It was all just tiny little snippets. It was like the band Ghost used to post on Instagram, and it was literally, here's a picture of us at a gig, full stop, and that was it. There was never too much given out, and it was never sort of any one member of the band was like posting loads or anything like that. You never really got too much of an insight, and that was what kept the mystique and the aura going. And then all of a sudden, There was all these little issues started arising within the band themselves, where band members felt like they weren't seen as on an equal footing and that they weren't getting paid their due recognition or their due funds and all of this.
They weren't making any money at all, and any money that they were making, like touring is incredibly expensive. I remember seeing it, I think it was with Devin Townsend from Strapping Young Lad, and he was saying even just for a normal tour, he was saying you have to make 50,000 a month to cover your expenses, cover buses and all that. He was saying that's to pay everyone. So,
and bear in mind as well, Ghost were at that stage, they were trying to expand their stage show, because they always had the kind of the backdrops with kind of stained glass windows and all the rest. They had all their costumes, and they were trying to get into a bit of pyrotechnics as well. So they're trying to expand and kind of embiggen their sort of stage show a little bit to try and ramp it up, because they were moving from the smaller venues, they're moving up to sort of almost arena sizes at this stage. So they're trying to like just make their shows that bit more bigger and more spectacular. So obviously you're going to have to try and pump a lot more money back into it. And at times as well, I mean, throughout their history, their stage gear gotten stolen, their outfits have gotten stolen at one stage as well, so they've had to replace stuff like this. And bearing in mind as well, going back to what we'd said about Tobias Forge coming from a call centre, some of them as well, they've been on the dole in Sweden, so like they're sort of, you know, they're not well off guys. You know, like most tour musicians, you're not well off.
Musician is, yeah.
You're basically you're living in a shitty van or a shitty bus or whatever. You've got no money. You're pumping all your money back into the stage,
but then
the gear and all that kind of stuff.
The kind of like, you know, all the stuff that happened then.
Yeah, so it was just basically some of the guys decided they were being ripped off and they wanted their money and they wanted more payment, even though they were getting paid as touring musicians, air quotes, and they decided they're going to sue Tobias Forge for extra money, that they're meant to be equal members of the band and they're meant to get X, Y, and Z amount of money, etc., and they wanted this, that, and the other. And it devolved into this whole messy, horrible court case where, you know, sort of all these papers were dragged through the court saying, well, actually, no, you never signed a contract to say that you're an equal member of the band. I wrote this and I wrote that. And
it went on for quite a long time as well. It exposed the band as well.
That was the trouble. That was what blew everything. Yeah, that was what blew everything into the public, because all of a sudden it went from Ghost being these nameless ghouls to Tobias Forge's name. Martin Persner was named, even though he actually didn't want to be part of the court case. He had actually left the band a couple of months prior to that because he just didn't want to be in the band anymore. He got to the point
where it was unbearable that he came out talking, well, he didn't, but Tobias Ford came out talking about saying that he was just like ignored on the bus, and there was a lot of kind of like intimidation and stuff, like things were after taking a
bit of a sour turn.
A lot of it was over money. They thought that, oh, there's loads of money being made and he's taking it all, where the thing was he couldn't get by at all. That wasn't it, because he was like, we'll have to keep. He was really pushing it into it, making sure they were all getting paid.
Yeah, that's it. Well, that's the thing. I mean, like they all had an agreement to get paid X amount, and it was enough to. Well, I can't say enough to get by, but it was the agreed amount from, you know, sort of my readings, because I did read kind of heavily into, you know, the transcripts of the court case and all the rest, and it was what had been agreed to, it was what was drawn up in solicitors' offices and all this kind of stuff, and it was what they signed to. And the way it was set up in that way was so that they could actually draw some money down from it, because otherwise you're not going to get a fucking cent out of it. So it was set up that way insofar as that there was a holding company, an entertainment holding company, and that they could all get paid out of it. That was the way that they all agreed to have it set up, so that they could actually get paid some sort of money out of the touring. But then they decided, hey, Ghost is getting big, we're not getting the due payment out of it, etc. And it just all turned really fucking sour from there. And then
they ended up losing the court case anyway, but it's still ongoing. They keep bringing it back.
No, so they keep on appealing it and all this kind of stuff. So, of course, what happened then was clearly the whole situation with the band broke down, or with the touring musicians, or with the relationships broke down. So most of the musicians all basically fucked off out of the band, and Tobias Forge just went, fine, that's great, I'm hiring other musicians in to continue.
And what you had with the people that left there was a Priest is one of the bands, isn't it? I think the guy that has, I can't remember his name, but the guy that has
Simon Soderbergh,
he's the main kind of like person with the lawsuit from kind of like reading around about. And Martin Persner, who, if you listen to Magna Carta Cartel, he's banned. It's very Ghost. ish, the guitarist. You can see, I think, and he was, because I think he's still friends with Tobias Forge.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much ill feeling between him and Tobias Forge, I think, because obviously he split out of the band before all of this happened. But that's out of all of them, I think Martin Persner is the one with all of the talent, besides Tobias Forge. Yeah. And it seems to be the best way I could describe it. No, they're terrible. They're absolute. I wouldn't be bothered with any of the rest of them. So it's Tobias Forge and it's Martin Persner were the two driving forces behind Ghost. Magna Carta Cartel is a very hard band to say. How I could describe them as very melancholy Beatles.
Yeah, they're kind of late 60s, early 70s kind of stuff, but it's a lot of stuff that you hear on Melioria with the guitar.
All the shimmery guitars kind of a thing,
I can't remember, I think it's like the Demon King or something like that was an EP that they did, and it was, I think they're really, really good. Not the kind of stuff that I'd normally listen to.
Yeah, they're not heavy rock, they're not heavy metal, they're not heavy rock at all, but they're very... they are very melancholy. That's the best way I could put it, I suppose, really. And there's something to listen to when if you're just feeling a little bit morose. Yeah.
Well, sad. It's the thing as well, kind of like after all, a lot of bands, they struggled to kind of come back after that. And as well, the timing was terrible because it was just when they're on the cusp and making it big. But then he went off, and because it's one of the things that seems to be, he's kind of like, one of the bonuses that he's got going for himself. He had the next album planned anyway already and partially written, kind of like well before any of this. He seems, and like these plans.
He seems to be a very methodical, planned out type of person. Yeah.
So then when this album came out, like I was expecting it kind of like, maybe it's not going to, because a lot of bands are not the same after stuff like that happens at all. And this was the one that fucking broke him. That they got massive, like Kerrang were constantly covering them, constant airplay and stuff. They had they would have been number one singles, I suppose, if there was a rock chart or anything like that. But they kind of got, I can't remember the name of it.
Raquel.
Yeah. Where it's a new Papa. Well, it's not a new Papa.
It's a Cardinal Copia,
Yeah, which is a bit of a kind of a dorky kind of guy that goes against. He doesn't have the corpse face paint.
Well, they broke tradition entirely because it was a Papa Emeritus up until now. It was always a Pope. And with this one, it was like they broke tradition. He wasn't quite ready to be a Pope yet, so he's a Cardinal. And Papa Niall and Sister Imperator
are a bit more kind of comedy to him, a bit more.
Yeah, he's a bit more. That was the whole thing. He's this sort of kind of comedy, kind of almost kind of a saucy kind of a character, because all the papas are all very they're very regal and threatening and sort of imposing.
Skateboards in, doesn't it? Like when they were doing the videos, introduced them and stuff, and the kind of the head of the papas, Papa Nil, was like, and why I own it.
So it's all gone very tongue in cheek and all the rest, which is, I suppose, that's probably what helped break, I suppose, as well, into the proper mainstream as well, because all of a sudden it just fucking exploded.
Well, the timing, I think, was right. Like I'm not a big fan of Prequel at all, but in my mind what it went from was 70s prog rock to 80s hair metal.
Possibly.
To a certain kind of, it was like 80s metal. Like Rats is that kind of like stadium filler, which he said, but he said he wanted to do all these things.
He wanted to do an absolute headbanger of a stadium, sort of.
But it was more kind of like not easygoing listen, but more accessible, I think, for people. It was more stadium rock.
Absolutely, so, that's
like it's like Ozzy Osbourne stuff. I'd say it's like comparing Ozzy Osbourne to Black Sabbath to a certain point, but.
And it's a lot poppier. Yeah. It is an awful lot poppier. I mean, you listen to something like Dance Macabre or something like that. It is proper. You could see it in the actual charts, let alone sort of like rock charts or metal charts.
And even the music videos changed to kind of like 80s and kind of like, dance, kind of like move, women dancing and but it's there's like
it's a lot more upbeat for sure because it was
about the plague.
Yeah, no, it was like it went from. Well, you see, that's the whole thing.
There you go. Tobias Forge is responsible for coronavirus.
I know, that's it. But it did kind of progressed up. It progressed up through. You're trying to say something there, Ryan. You're like, oh no, I'll sow the seeds. Tobias Forge is responsible for my impotence, oh no. And this is how I found out.
He is. The stuff that he did to me.
But it progressed from sort of like early 70s through to late 70s, and it came into sort of late 80s now, and it's got that real sort of fucking stadium happy. It's got that real sort of positive sort of like, as I said, stadium rock.
Massive. Like they went from kind of like doing all these small tours. They went touring with Iron Maiden and touring with Metallica. We saw them with Metallica. They were opened up by Picasso, who are another good band actually, up and coming. They're going to be big.
And I think that was probably half the reason as well that he probably did prequel as well, was because he was aware. He knew he was going to be touring Metallica, and he knew he was going to be in fucking stadiums and arenas, and he was kind of like, fuck, I need a couple of songs that are going to hold up in a stadium setting. And I mean, like, your Ghost, you're opening up for Metallica are going to fill a stadium.
Yeah.
They're going to have headbanging tunes, and you're opening up to a load of people who are going, get off the fucking stage, where's fucking Iron Maiden or Metallica?
They
needed
really,
those tunes.
Really well.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But it's like, but I think they would have been well enough known